The massive ship called Stellar Dominion floated quietly in space, its walls made of special crystal that sparkled like stars. Inside the grand hall, Admiral Kextor stood tall among hundreds of alien guests. He was huge, with blue scales covering his body and 4 bright eyes that seemed to see everything. For 400 years, this powerful warrior had won every single battle he fought. Other aliens whispered his name with fear and respect across the galaxy. The hall was full of strange sounds as creatures from different worlds talked in their own languages. Some looked like giant insects, others had tentacles instead of arms, and a few glowed with their own light. They were all important people, generals, ambassadors, and leaders from across space. In one corner of the room, almost hidden by the much larger aliens, stood a human man named Lee Hyun. He wore the uniform of a commander, but compared to the towering creatures around him, he looked very small. Humans were still new to this galactic community. The other species thought humans were brave fighters, but they believed humans were not smart enough for real war planning. Lee Hyun had black hair and dark eyes that showed he was thinking deeply about something. He watched the party quietly, not trying to talk to the important aliens who barely noticed he was there. Most of them saw humans as children who might grow up someday to be useful. As the evening went on, the lights dimmed for a special moment. This was a time when everyone remembered soldiers who had died in battles. It was a tradition that all the different alien species followed, even though they had their own ways of doing it. Lee Hyun stepped forward slowly. The crowd watched as he reached into his pocket and pulled out something very small, a white flower from Earth. It was simple and plain compared to the fancy crystals and glowing object that other aliens placed on the memorial table. But Lee Hyun held it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. He placed the flower gently on the table and closed his eyes for a moment. The flower was for Lieutenant Park Jin, his best friend and fellow human soldier. Park Jin had died just 3 months ago while protecting a mining colony full of Zalani civilians from space pirates. Admiral Kextor was watching this human ceremony with his 4 eyes. He found it amusing how humans always made such a big deal about their feelings. A deep, rumbling laugh came from his throat, and it was so loud that everyone in the hall could hear it. The sound made the crystal walls vibrate. How charmingly primitive, Kextor said in a voice that commanded attention from everyone in the room. His words carried the power of someone who had never been wrong about war. These humans and their emotional displays. So childish, so weak. The hall became very quiet. Even the aliens who had been talking loudly stopped to listen. Some of them nodded their heads, agreeing with the great admiral. They had always thought humans were too emotional to be good at warfare. Kextor's crest, which was like a crown of bone on his head, rose higher as he became more interested in making his point. "Tell me, Commander," he said, looking directly at Lee Hyun with all 4 of his eyes. "Did your friend die because of the same sentimental thinking? I imagine he charged headfirst into danger without proper tactical consideration, like all humans do." Many of the alien guests made sounds that meant they agreed. They had heard stories about how humans fought, always rushing into danger to save others, never thinking about the smart way to win battles. To them, this proved that humans were not ready for real military leadership. But Lee Hyun did not look angry or embarrassed. His face stayed calm, like the surface of a still lake. However, his dark eyes changed. They became as cold and hard as the empty space between stars. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but everyone could hear every word. "Lieutenant Park Jin died," Lee Hyun said, each word clear and strong, "saving 12,000 Zalani civilians while your superior tactical planning kept your fleet 3 days behind schedule." The words hit the hole like a bomb. Complete silence fell over everyone. The aliens stopped making their agreeing sounds. Even the ship's machines seemed to get quieter. Some of the aliens knew this story. They had heard about the human who sacrificed himself to save a colony while the great Admiral Kextor's fleet was late to help. Kextor's crest flared brighter, showing his anger. His blue scales seemed to get darker. For someone who had never lost a battle, being reminded of a time when he was too slow was like being slapped in the face. "Emotion makes soldiers weak, human," Kextor said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. "Your species will never understand true warfare. You fight with your hearts instead of your minds, and that is why you will always be inferior." The tension in the room was so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Everyone knew they were watching something important happen, but none of them could guess that this moment would change everything. The air in the great hole felt thick and heavy, like it might explode at any moment. Everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. Lee Hyun took one step forward, keeping his back straight and his head high. He showed respect to the powerful admiral, but he was not backing down. "Perhaps you'd like to test that theory, Admiral," Lee Hyun said in a calm voice that carried across the silent room. Kextor's 4 bright eyes got smaller as he looked at the human with new interest. This was unexpected. No one had ever dared to challenge the great admiral directly. His massive head tilted slightly, like a predator studying its prey. "Are you challenging me, little human?" Kextor asked. His voice was low and dangerous, like distant thunder warning of a coming storm. The alien guests pressed closer, trying to hear every word. Some of them had tentacles or mechanical parts that they used to record everything. They knew they were watching something that will be talked about for years to come. Lee Hyun did not look nervous at all. His voice stayed steady and clear. "A war game simulation," he said. "Your finest strategists against my tactical team. Full-scale fleet engagement, with neutral observers from the Galactic Council as judges." The aliens around them began to whisper in their strange languages. A war game between the greatest military mind in the galaxy and a human? It seemed impossible. It seemed crazy. But it was happening right in front of them. Lee Hyun paused for a moment, looking directly into Kextor's 4 eyes without fear. "When I win, you will publicly apologize for dishing Lieutenant Park's memory and resign your position. If you win..." His voice stayed strong and did not shake. "Humans will voluntarily withdraw from all senior military positions within the Galactic Council." The gasps that came from the crowd were so loud they echoed off the crystal walls. Some aliens made sounds of shock in their own languages. Others began talking excitedly to each other. This was not just a challenge between 2 officers. This was about the future of all humans in space. Several important alien diplomats immediately activated their recording devices. They knew they were watching history happen. Some of them had been alive for thousands of years, but they had never seen anything like this. The stakes were enormous. If Lee Hyun lost, every human in a position of military leadership would have to step down. Humans would be pushed back to being just foot soldiers, never allowed to make important decisions about war and peace. But if he won, if somehow this small human could defeat the legend himself. Kextor's reputation was built on one simple rule. He never said no to any challenge. In 400 years of war, he had fought anyone who dared to face him, and he had crushed them all. His mandibles, which were like sharp jaws on the sides of his mouth, clicked together in the way his species smiled. You would stake your entire species' military future on your emotional thinking. Kextor asked. He seemed amused by the idea, like an adult watching a child try to lift a weight that was far too heavy. Lee Hyun's answer came without any hesitation. "I would stake it on honor," he said. Something Lieutenant Park understood better than any tactical manual could teach. The Admiral's laugh was deep and harsh, like rocks grinding against each other. It was not a happy sound. It was a laugh of someone who had seen too many battles and won them all. "Very well, human. In 3 days' time, we shall see how your honor fares against true military genius. I accept your challenge." The words seemed to explode through the hall. Aliens began talking all at once, their voices mixing together in dozens of different languages. Some sounded excited, others sounded worried. Many of them began making bets on how quickly the human would lose. As the crowd started to spread out, talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed, Lee Hyun did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, standing next to the memorial table. His hand rested gently on the small white flower he had placed there for his friend Park Jin. Other humans who worked on the ship came over to him. Their faces showed that they were both proud of their commander and terrified about what he had just done. They knew that in 3 days, the future of their entire species would be decided. Lieutenant Kim Soo, who handled communications for Lee Hyun's team, came close and whispered so only his commander could hear. "So," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "Kextor has never lost a battle. Ever. Not once in 400 years. Lee Hyun did not look at her. His eyes stayed focused on the small flower that represented his dead friend. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but strong. Neither had Park Jin. until the day it mattered most. Kim-soo did not understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her feel less afraid. Around them, the hall was still buzzing with excited talk about the challenge. But Lee Hyun stood perfectly still, like he was having a conversation with someone who was not there anymore. The flowers seemed very small and fragile on the big memorial table, but it had started something that would shake the entire galaxy. The war room where Admiral Kextor worked was huge and filled with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Bright holographic images floated in the air, showing space battle from hundreds of years ago. The Admiral stood in the center like a giant blue statue, his 4 eyes watching everything at once. Around him, 12 of the smartest military minds in known space worked at their stations. These were not ordinary officers. Each one had studied war for decades or even centuries. Their brains could calculate the movement of thousands of ships at the same time. They could predict what enemies would do before the enemies even knew it themselves. Together, they had helped Kextor win every battle he had ever fought. Subcommander Vextal, who was the Admiral's most trusted advisor, worked at a station covered in glowing numbers and charts. His 6 arms moved quickly across different controls as he studied every human battle that had ever been recorded. The computer showed him patterns that most beings could never see. Pattern analysis complete, Admiral, Vextal reported in his mechanical voice. His species did not show emotions the way others did, which made them perfect for studying war. Human forces consistently exhibit the same weaknesses: over-reliance on individual initiative, tendency to break formation for rescue operations, and decision-making compromised by emotional attachment to personnel. Kextor made a sound that showed he was pleased. After 400 years of war, he knew that understanding an enemy's weaknesses was the key to victory. And their strengths? He asked, though he did not sound worried about the answer. Vextal paused for a moment, as if he found the next part difficult to explain. Unpredictability, high individual combat effectiveness, and unusual persistence in hopeless situations. The way he said it made it sound like these were strange things that did not make sense to logical minds. The Admiral's laugh was cold and confident. Desperation masquerading as courage, he said, waving one of his massive hands in dismissal. Prepare standard containment formations. We'll let them exhaust themselves against superior positioning, then systematically eliminate their scattered forces. The other strategists nodded and began working on battle plans that had won countless victories. They would surround the humans, force them to attack strong positions, and then pick them off one by one when they inevitably broke formation to try to save each other. Far away, in a much smaller room, Lee Hyun sat alone at a simple desk. His preparation room was tiny compared to Kextor's war center. There were no floating holograms or advanced computers, just one small screen and a chair. But Lee Hyun was studying something very different from what the Admiral's team was looking at. Instead of studying human battles, Lee Hyun was looking at Kextor's failures. In 400 years of war, the great Admiral had lost exactly 3 times. It was not much, but it was enough. Lee Hyun read every report, watched every recording, and studied every detail of those 3 defeats. What he found was interesting. Each time Kextor had lost, it was against enemies who refused to fight the way war was supposed to be fought. They did not follow the rules that military schools taught. They did not do what the computers predicted they should do. They treated the laws of war like suggestions instead of absolute rules. Lee Hyun's team was much smaller than Kextor's. He had only 5 officers, and none of them were considered brilliant by galactic standards. Kim-soo was good at communications, but not famous for it. Lieutenant Cho Minute handled supplies and logistics, important work, but not the kind that made legends. Lieutenant Baek Yun led fighter pilots, Lieutenant Oh Tai worked with electronic systems, and Sergeant Major Jung Hai managed ground troops. They were ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. The galaxy saw them as competent but not exceptional. What the galaxy did not understand was that this ordinariness was exactly what made them dangerous. During their final planning meeting, the small team gathered around Lee Hyun's simple desk. The room felt cramped with all 6 of them there, but it also felt safe. These were people who had served together for years, who trusted each other completely. Kim-soo, who was usually confident, looked worried. "So," she asked quietly, "what if we're wrong? What if emotion really does make us weak? What if the Admiral is right and we're just fooling ourselves?" It was a question they were all thinking but had been afraid to ask. Li Yun looked at each of his officers carefully. These were people he had fought beside in real battles, not just simulations. They had saved his life, and he had saved theirs. They were more than just his team. They were his family. Park Jin had 3 seconds to decide whether to detonate the charges that would save the colony. Li Yun said slowly. 3 seconds to choose between living and protecting 12,000 strangers he had never met. He looked into each of their faces, making sure they understood. Tell me, what does pure logic choose in 3 seconds? Cho Minute answered in a voice that was barely a whisper. Self-preservation. And what did Park Jin choose? Jung Hai's voice was thick with emotion when she replied. Everyone else. Li Yun nodded, and for the first time since the challenge began, he smiled. That's not weakness. That's the only strength that truly matters. The neutral observation ship floated quietly in space, its simulation chamber filled with bright energy. Inside this special room, 2 fleets appeared like ghosts made of light. Hundreds of alien observers crowded around the viewing areas, their strange eyes fixed on what was about to happen. Admiral Kextor's fleet looked perfect. 60 ships arranged in formations that military schools taught as examples of excellence. His heavy cruisers sat in the center like strong fortresses, while smaller destroyer ships protected the sides. Fighter squadrons flew in neat patterns, every movement planned and coordinated. It was beautiful to watch, like a deadly dance performed by masters. Li Yun's fleet looked completely different. Only 30 ships, and they seemed to be scattered randomly across the battlefield like leaves blown by wind. There was no formation, no clear defensive line, no obvious plan. To the watching aliens, it looked like chaos facing order. Human forces are dispersing without establishing defensive perimeters, said the official military analyst from a galactic council. His voice carried across the observation chamber, and many aliens nodded in agreement. This appears to confirm all assessments of human strategic thinking. In his command center within the simulation, Kextor watched Li Yun's ship spread out and felt satisfied. This was exactly what his computers had predicted humans would do. They had no discipline, no real understanding of proper warfare. Begin standard advancement, Kextor ordered his perfectly trained officers. Maintain formation integrity. Let them come to us. But the humans did not come charging forward as expected. Instead, something strange began to happen. Single human ships broke away from their scattered positions and flew straight toward the strongest parts of Kextor's formation. It looked like suicide. Kim's communications ship, small and fast, suddenly accelerated toward a group of Zalani destroyers. The alien ships fired at her, their weapons lighting up space with deadly energy. Kim's ship took hit after hit, its armor breaking apart, but it kept flying forward. At the last second, it crashed into 2 destroyer ships, destroying all 3 vessels in a brilliant explosion. The watching aliens gasped. It was brave, but it seemed pointless. 1 human ship had destroyed 2 enemy ships, but at the cost of its own destruction. That was not good strategy. Then Cho Min's supply ship did something even stranger. Instead of staying safely in the back like supply ships always did, it flew straight toward a massive enemy cruiser. The big ship tried to shoot it down, but the small supply vessel was too fast. It rammed directly into the cruiser's engine section, causing both ships to explode. Emotional decision-making, Kextor announced to his staff, his voice full of certainty. They are sacrificing themselves out of anger rather than tactical necessity. Exactly as predicted. His officers nodded, making notes about human behavior. This would be useful information for future battles against human forces. The aliens in the observation chamber were taking notes too, confirming what they had always believed about human warfare. But as the battle continued, something was not right. Each time a human ship sacrificed itself, it seemed to hit very specific targets. Kim's had not just destroyed 2 ships, she had destroyed the main communication relay that connected that part of the fleet to Admiral Kextor's commands. Cho Minute had not just damaged the cruiser, she had knocked out the engine that powered the targeting computers for an entire squadron. Lieutenant Baek Yun's fighter squadron was doing something completely unexpected too. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, her small fighters were flying dangerous missions to blind sensors and jam communication systems. They were like tiny insects bothering a giant, but the giant was starting to have trouble seeing and hearing. As the battle reached its middle point, Admiral Kextor began to notice problems. His ships were still in perfect formation, but they were having trouble talking to each other. Orders he sent to one group of ships never reached them. Targeting information was coming back wrong, showing enemy ships in places where there was only empty space. Admiral, Subcommander Vextau reported, and for the first time in the battle, his mechanical voice carried worry. We're losing coordination. Our communication networks are being systematically disrupted. These random attacks. I don't think they are random. Kextor's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display with new attention. Li Yun's fleet was down to fewer than 15 ships now, less than half of what he had started with. But something had changed. The remaining human ships had stopped their scattered, seemingly suicidal attacks. Instead, they began moving with a precision that was terrifying to watch. Every ship knew exactly where to go and what to do. They moved like they were all part of one mind, heading toward targets that suddenly became clear and important. All those meaningless sacrifices had not been meaningless at all. Every ship that had died had been positioning for this exact moment. Kim Su's attack on the communication relay, Cho Min's strike on the engine systems, Baek Yun's systematic blinding of sensors, they had all been preparing the battlefield for what was about to happen. Kextor's perfect formation, which had been his greatest strength, was about to become his greatest weakness. And he was just beginning to understand that he had been fighting the wrong battle entirely. The final part of the battle looked hopeless for the humans. Li Yun had only a few ships left, maybe 15 at most, while Admiral Kextor still commanded more than 40 vessels. The human ships were scattered and damaged, floating like broken toys in the simulated space. It seemed like the great Admiral had been right all along about human weakness. Kextor's fleet moved forward in perfect order, ready to finish what should have been an easy victory. The alien observers in the watching chamber began to nod with satisfaction. This was exactly what they had expected, humans fighting bravely but losing to superior strategy and discipline. Victory is assured, Kextor announced loudly so all the observers could hear him. His voice was full of pride and certainty. Human emotion has led to their predictable. But his words stopped in the middle of his sentence. Something impossible was happening on the battlefield. A ship that everyone thought had been destroyed an hour ago suddenly appeared from behind the wreckage of a broken cruiser. It was Lieutenant Otai's electronic warfare vessel, and it had been hiding there the entire time. The ship looked badly damaged, with pieces of its hull missing and sparks flying from broken systems. But all of its power, every bit of energy it had left, had been focused into one single weapon. Otai fired a massive electromagnetic pulse that spread out like an invisible wave across the entire battlefield. In an instant, every communication system in Kextor's fleet went silent. Ships that had been talking to each other suddenly could not hear anything. Commanders could not give orders. Sensors went blind. The perfect coordination that made Kextor's formation so strong disappeared in a single moment. In the darkness of the communication blackout, Li Yun's remaining ships did something that no computer could have predicted. Sergeant Major Jung Hai's troop transport, which should have been carrying soldiers, was instead loaded with every explosive device the humans could build. But instead of trying to ram an enemy ship, it flew to the exact center of Kextor's formation and detonated itself. The explosion was massive, but it was not meant to destroy enemy ships. Instead, it created a huge cloud of debris, pieces of metal, broken equipment, and chunks of hull that spread out in all directions. The debris field looked random, but it had been calculated perfectly. Lieutenant Baek Yun's fighter squadron, which everyone thought had been eliminated earlier, suddenly emerged from inside the expanding cloud of wreckage. But they were not attacking the enemy ships directly. Instead, they were using the debris itself as a weapon, pushing and directing pieces of wreckage toward very specific targets in the enemy formation. Kextor's perfect positioning, which had been designed to let his ships protect each other, suddenly became a trap. When the first ship was hit by debris and started to drift, it crashed into the ship next to it. That ship then hit another ship, and another, creating a chain reaction of collisions that spread through the entire formation like a disease. The alien observers watched in amazement as the most disciplined fleet in galactic history destroyed itself. Ships that had been arranged in perfect order were now spinning out of control, crashing into their neighbors, unable to coordinate any response because they could not communicate with each other. In less than 10 minutes, Admiral Kextor's invincible fleet was reduced to scattered, isolated ships floating helplessly in space. They had weapons, but no targets they could hit without risking their own allies. They had armor, but no coordination to use it effectively. The greatest tactical mind in the galaxy had been completely outmaneuvered. The simulation ended with an image that would be remembered forever. Lee Yoon's command ship, along with 2 other human vessels, floated in the middle of a field of wreckage. They were surrounded by the remains of both fleets, but they were the only ship still functioning as a coordinated unit. Lee Yoon had not won by being stronger or having better weapons. He had won by making Admiral Kextor defeat himself. In the observation chamber, silence fell over hundreds of alien spectators. 400 years of military legend had just been shattered by a small human with a handful of ships and a plan that seemed like madness until the very end. Kextor's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet and humble. All of his earlier arrogance was gone. "You're Lieutenant Park Jin," he said slowly, as if he was just beginning to understand something important. He didn't die from impulsiveness. "No," Lee Yoon replied from his position in the simulation chamber. "He died from love. Love for people he'd never met, who would never know his name. That's what you mistook for weakness, our ability to calculate the value of sacrifice in ways your computers never could." The great admiral's hands shook as he removed the insignia from his uniform, the symbols that marked him as one of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. "I formally apologize for dishing your friend's memory. I resign my commission and recommend Commander Lee Yoon as my replacement." He paused, looking at the human with something like wonder in his 4 eyes. "Not because you defeated me, but because you taught me that some battles are worth losing everything to win." 3 days later, Lee Yoon stood alone in front of Park Jin's memorial on the ship that was now under his command. He placed a fresh white flower next to the first one, both of them bright against the dark metal of the memorial table. "They understand now, old friend," he whispered to the memory of his fallen comrade. "They understand what makes us dangerous isn't that we don't feel fear, it's that we love each other more than we fear death." In the vastness of space around the great ship, the small flowers seemed tiny and fragile. But they represented something that was stronger than any weapon or strategy, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. And that, Lee Yoon knew, was a force that could never be defeated.